tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So continuing on with Buddhadhamma, Chapter 11, Happiness. This is page 835, Diverse Grades of Happiness. The Buddha stated that he had realized a sublime happiness independent of sensuality, and for this reason he could assert that he would not circle back to seek out sense pleasure again. He had not experienced this sublime happiness. Had he not experienced this sublime happiness, he would not have been able to make such an assertion. The Buddha then went on to say that even though noble disciples clearly discern with right wisdom that sense pleasure has little sweetness and much suffering, that it has much affliction and danger, if they have not yet experienced the sublime bliss and happiness independent of sensuality, they will not yet be able to say with confidence that they will not revert back in search of sense pleasure. Similarly, he warned the monks in particular that if someone who has gone forth has not yet savored the sublime bliss and happiness independent of sensual pleasures, it is still possible for various defilements like covetousness, ill will, restlessness, laziness, and boredom to overwhelm the mind. Such a person will not delight in the holy life, or will not be able to endure living the holy life. Apart from demonstrating the importance Buddhism gives to happiness, these references also reveal how noble disciples do not abandon sense desire because sensuality is void of pleasure, or because Buddhism teaches to abstain from pleasure. Buddhism acknowledges pleasure and happiness as it truly exists. It encourages people to practice in order to achieve happiness, and it recognizes that sensuality comprises one form of happiness. Noble disciples abandon sense desire because they see that despite the inherent pleasures of sensuality, it is still mixed up with a great deal of suffering. And importantly, there is a more profound form of happiness, exceeding that of sense pleasure, exceeding the pleasures derived from consuming the various delightful objects in the world. Noble disciples abandon sense desire because they have savored the more refined form of happiness. There are thus different levels of happiness. Here we can examine how Buddhism classifies them. The Dukkha Nipata of the Anguttara Nikaya separates happiness into various kinds and degrees, providing a long list of pairs, including the happiness of householders and the happiness of renunciates, the happiness of sensuality and the happiness of renunciation, mundane happiness and transcendent happiness, and the happiness of noble beings and the happiness of ordinary beings. A clear and detailed classification of the various levels of happiness is teaching on the 10 levels of happiness, which is found in many places in the Tipitaka. 1. Sense pleasure, kama, joy and happiness dependent on the 5 chords of sensuality. 2. Happiness of the first jhana, which is removed from sensuality and unwholesome states and is comprised of initial and sustained thought, bliss, happiness, and one-pointedness. 3. Happiness of the second jhana, which is comprised of bliss, happiness, and one-pointedness. 4. Happiness of the third jhana, which is comprised of happiness and one-pointedness. 5. Happiness of the fourth jhana. Happiness of the fourth jhana is comprised of equanimity and one-pointedness. 6. The happiness of the attainment of the sphere of unbounded space. And then in this concentrative attainment, one transcends the perception of form and the perception of repulsion, and one pays no attention to the perception of diversity. One directs attention solely on the infinity of space. 7. Happiness of the attainment of the sphere of unbounded consciousness. In this concentrative attainment, one meditates on the infinity of consciousness as one's object of attention. 8, the happiness of the attainment of the sphere of nothingness. In this attainment, one meditates on the state of nothingness as one's object of attention. 9, happiness of the attainment of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. 10, happiness associated with the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling. It is possible to abbreviate these 10 kinds of happiness into 3 levels. 1, happiness associated with sensuality. 2, happiness associated with jhana, or happiness associated with the 8 concentrative attainments, which can be further divided into 2 subcategories. 2.1, happiness associated with the 4 fine material jhanas, and happiness associated with the 4 formless jhanas. And the third type of category of happiness, happiness associated with the attainment of cessation, nirodha samapatti. All of these aforementioned kinds of happiness are acknowledged as constituting happiness, but they are seen as representing gradually more refined and superior forms of happiness. The initial kinds of happiness still contain harmful aspects and are tied up with suffering. The higher forms of happiness are more refined and pure. The scriptures teach to recognize these kinds of happiness as they truly are, both their pleasurable aspects and those aspects tied up with suffering, both their advantages, the asada, and disadvantages, the adinawa, both their merits and dangers. Moreover, they reveal the way out, the escape, nisarana, or the freedom from all conditioned states of happiness, which is independent of both the advantages and disadvantages. When one sees the dangers of coarser forms of happiness, one becomes disenchanted by them and aspires toward more refined happiness. And when one has witnessed for oneself refined forms of happiness, one abandons the coarser forms and seeks ever more sublime happiness. At the very least, one will not be overly engrossed in coarse pleasures. Whenever people are liberated in a decisive way and the bonds of mental defilement have been utterly severed, they will never return to seek out coarser forms of happiness. They will experience only the refined happiness corresponding to a liberated mind. Experiencing these gradually more refined forms of happiness is one attribute of making progress in Dhamma practice. Following are some teachings that help to clarify the aforementioned subject material. And not all of these sutra references are given, he just writes them out. They're just written out here. Monks, there are these 5 chords of sense pleasure, forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, tastes cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, that are desirable, alluring, likable and agreeable, attractive and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sense pleasure. Now the happiness and joy that arises dependent on these 5 chords of sense pleasure is the gratification in the case of sense pleasure. The happiness and joy is called sense pleasure, kama sukha. The term kama refers to 2 things, alluring material objects and desire as mental impurity. What are alluring material objects? Pleasing visual forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles, rugs, blankets, female and male servants, goats, sheep, chickens, pigs, elephants, cows, horses, donkeys, rice paddies, land. It's all the things we can covet. Silver, gold, houses, villages, royal towns, states, countries, armies, and royal treasuries. Whatever material objects are the basis for attachment are called alluring material objects. Furthermore, all objects of desire existing in the past, present, and future, existing internally, externally, or both internally and externally, those that are base, middling, and superior, those belonging to beings in unhappy states of existence, belonging to human beings, and belonging to the celestial realms, those that are immediately at hand, those that are self-created, and those that are created by others, those owned and those not owned, those coveted and those not coveted, those that belong entirely to the sense sphere, those that belong entirely to the fine material sphere, and those that belong entirely to the formless sphere, which are the basis for craving, the objects of craving. They are called objects of desire on account of being a basis for desire, on account of being a basis for infatuation. All of these are called alluring material objects. And what is desire as mental impurity? Delight is desire. Lust is desire. Lustful attachment is desire. Purpose, sankappa, is desire. Lustful preoccupation is desire. Sensual desire, sensual lust, sensual delight. Kamanandi, sensual craving, sensual attachment. Passion for sensual pleasure. Infatuation for sensual pleasure. Obsession with sensual pleasure. Sense desire engulfing the mind, sense desire binding the mind, grasping to sensual pleasure, the hindrance of sense desire in the phrase, "Look here, sense desire, I see your origin. You arise from intention. I will no longer be preoccupied with you. By doing this, you will remain no longer." All these are called desire as mental impurity. I think that might be a commentarial paragraph. Monks, the conception of an embryo in a womb takes place through the union of three things. When there is the union of mother and father, and it is the mother's season, and the being to be reborn is present. Through the union of these three things, the conception of an embryo in a womb takes place. The mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months with great risk to her life as a heavy burden. Then, at the end of 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth with great risk to her life as a heavy burden. She then nourishes the newborn child with her own blood, for the mother's milk is called blood in the Noble One's tradition. And then there's some more sutta excerpts that Prapayutto chooses to highlight here. A young infant child lying on his back plays even with his own urine and feces. What do you think? Isn't that completely amusing for that infant child? Yes, Venerable Sir. Sometime later, when that child grows up and his faculties mature, he plays the games that are typical for children, games with toy plows, stick games, somersaults, games with pinwheels, game with measures made of sand, games with toy chariots, games with toy bows. What do you think? Isn't this amusement superior and more refined than the former kind? Yes, Venerable Sir. At a still later time, as that boy continues to grow up and his faculties mature still further, he enjoys himself furnished and endowed with the 5 objects of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, odors, tastes, tangibles that are desirable, alluring, likable and appealing, attractive and provocative of lust. What do you think? Isn't this amusement superior and more refined than the former kind? Yes, Venerable Sir. Among householders, the most exalted person is a universal emperor, a Chakravarti, or wheel-turning monarch, who wields supreme power and is replete with material wealth. According to Buddhism, such a person is also endowed with superior virtue. A universal emperor is thus considered to have the greatest amount of happiness, greater than that generally experienced by other human beings. The Buddha referred to the happiness of a universal monarch in order to describe the most complete form of ordinary human happiness, and to compare it with other levels and degrees of happiness, revealing their relative subtlety and profundity. The emperor's 4 kinds of success are as follows. 1, his outward appearance is more handsome and majestic than that of all other men. 2, his lifespan is longer than that of all other people. 3, he is healthy and strong with few illnesses. 4, his subjects are loyal to him. They love him like children love their parents, and he loves them as a father loves his children. When he travels outside of the palace, the people receive him and wish to spend as much time as possible with him. He too wishes to spend time with them. The happiness and pleasure of such an emperor is superior to that of other people, including the young man referred to in the previous quotation. Nevertheless, the Buddha said that however great is the happiness of a universal emperor, it is paltry, even inconsequential, when compared to the happiness of the celestial realms. It is similar to comparing a small stone the size of one's palm to the towering Himalayas. Although divine happiness is an elevated form of sensual pleasure, greatly exceeding the sense pleasure of human beings, there exists a happiness more sublime than this. Such a latter form of sublime happiness is independent of sensuality and of external objects of gratification. Those who have experienced it feel no envy or desire when they see someone else who is enjoying abundant sense pleasure. This is similar to celestial beings who feel no envy or delight in the inferior happiness of human beings. Moreover, these individuals have no yearning even for divine happiness because they have experienced a superior form of happiness. In this context, the Buddha recounted his own experiences. So too, Magandia, formerly when I lived the home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, fragrances, tastes, tangibles that are desirable, alluring, likable, and appealing, attractive and provocative of lust. I had 3 palaces, one for the rainy season, one for the winter, and one for the summer. I lived in the rain's palace for the 4 months of the rainy season, enjoying myself with musicians who were all female, and I did not have to step out of the palace for 4 months. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the transience, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensual pleasures, I abandoned craving for sensual pleasures. I dispelled the fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst with a mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures being devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because I delight in the happiness apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states. Therefore I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. Suppose, Magandia, a householder or a householder's son was rich, with great wealth and property, and being provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, he might enjoy himself. Having conducted himself well, he might reappear in a happy destination, in the heavenly world, in the retinue of the gods of the 33, and there, surrounded by a group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, he would enjoy himself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of divine sensual pleasure. Suppose he saw a householder or a householder's son enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What do you think? Would that young god envy the householder or the householder's son for the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, delight in the 5 chords of human sensual pleasure, or be nostalgic for human sensual pleasures? No, Master Gautama. Why not? Because heavenly sensual pleasures are more excellent and sublime than human sensual pleasures. So too, Magandia, I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein, because I delight in the happiness apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses even divine bliss. Therefore I do not envy an inferior happiness, nor do I delight therein. So that's just driving the point home about these different gradations of happiness. And we'll just finish off with a short reading from Luang Por Cha. This is from the Collected Teachings of Ajahn Chah, page 221, The Arising of Wisdom. Wisdom, panya, is to see the truth of the various manifestations of body and mind. When we use our trained and concentrated minds to examine the 5 khandhas, We will see clearly that both body and mind are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. In seeing all compounded things with wisdom, we do not cling or grasp at them. Whatever we receive mindfully. We are not excessively happy. When things of ours break up or disappear, we are not unhappy and do not suffer painful feelings, for we see clearly the impermanent nature of all things. When we encounter illness and pain of any sort, we have equanimity because our minds have been well trained. The true refuge is the trained mind. All of this is known as the wisdom which knows the true characteristics of things as they arise. Wisdom arises from mindfulness and concentration. Concentration arises from a base of morality or virtue. Morality, concentration, and wisdom are so interrelated that it is not really possible to separate them. In practice, it can be looked at this way. First, there is the disciplining of the mind to be attentive to the breathing. This is the arising of morality. When mindfulness of breathing is practiced continuously until the mind is quiet, this is the arising of samadhi. Then examination, showing the breath is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, and the subsequent non-attachment to it is the arising of wisdom. Thus, the practice of mindfulness of breathing can be said to be a course for the development of morality, concentration, and wisdom. They all come together. When morality, concentration, and wisdom are all developed, we call this practicing the Eightfold Path, which the Buddha taught as our only way out of suffering. The Eightfold Path is above all others because if properly practiced, it leads directly to Nibbana, to peace. We can say that this practice teaches the Buddhadhamma. We can say that this practice reaches the Buddhadhamma truly and precisely. When we have practiced meditation as explained above, the fruits of practice will arise in the following 3 stages. First, for those practitioners who are at the level of Buddhist by faith, there will arise increasing faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. This faith will become the real inner support of each person. Also, they will understand the cause and effect nature of all things, that wholesome action brings a wholesome result, and that unwholesome action brings an unwholesome result. So, for such persons, there will be a great increase in happiness and mental peace. Second, those who have reached the noble attainments of stream winner, once returner, or non-returner will have unshakable faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. They are joyful and are pulled towards Nibbana. Third, for those arahants or perfected ones, there will be the happiness free from all suffering. These are the Buddhas, free from the world, complete in the faring of the holy way. We have all had the good fortune to be born as human beings and to hear the teachings of the Buddha. This is an opportunity that millions of other beings do not have. Therefore, do not be careless or heedless. Hurry and develop merit. Do good and follow the path of practice in the beginning, in the middle, and in the highest levels. Don't let time roll by unused and without purpose. Try to reach the truth of the Buddha's teachings, even today. Let me close with a Lao folk saying, "Many rounds of merriment and pleasure past, soon it will be evening. Drunk with tears now, rest and see, soon it will be too late to finish the journey." So we'll end there for today. Any comments or questions?
To attain the happiness of jhana presupposes the absence of the hindrances. I've been noticing my dreams can be pretty easily classified by hindrance, whether it's remorse or lust or fear, aversion. And it got me thinking, does that mean that a mind free from the hindrances would be in access concentration all the time?
Well, I mean, the thing is I wouldn't say that because it's also the aspect of I mean, one is being free from hindrances, but then also there's also a bringing the mind together in the a sense of coalescing or forming together as a ekakada, or unification of the mind. So that so that is another level of intention, right? The intention to pull the mind or to pull back from the hindrances is one, but then there's also there's a sort of a pulling together or unification of mind, which is one directs one's attention in that way, so that there's a I mean, it's just another level of it, in the sense that one needs to step back from the hindrances, but then one also has to, say, go forward to engage the mind in that unification, so then it settles at another level. So that sometimes stepping back from the hindrances is one that can be one of refraining, but then there also has to be an engaging as well for that concentration to settle.
But wouldn't an arahant be free from the hindrances all the time?
So that's a whole other level.
So that's, he was asking about hindrances in dreams. Does that necessarily preclude the samadhi in your waking state?
Well, I mean, in dreams are a whole other, because you're not formulating intentions usually in dreams. It might be more of a resultant of one's. So it's like in the Vinaya, you're not say in the monastic Vinaya, then you are not culpable for any act you do in a dream because you're not formulating the same kind of intention. So it's so that similarly one can be reaping the fruits of say freedom from the hindrances, but one doesn't. Like, I mean, I've had all sorts of dreams of extremely peaceful and lucid and coming into contact with great teachers and great beings, and it didn't enlighten me though. So even if it was a good dream, it didn't. This is quite a it's a different kind of engaging of the mind that's required.
Could it also be said that in the waking state, you don't need to be continuously and forever free from the five hindrances to be able to have periods of time when you are, such that you can have some significant insight?
Well, the thing is I mean, the mind is stepping back from the hindrances because you see the danger in them, and but also because the mind is engaging in reflection and investigation, and even say the arising of an unwholesome mental state, which could be